She thought she had all the power. She thought she could decide who belonged and who didn't. But what she didn't know? The man she humiliated in first class owned the entire airline. And the moment she found out, it was already too late. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new one. The first-class cabin carried an air of quiet luxury. Plush seats stretched out with ample legroom, passengers relaxed under soft lighting, and the subtle clinking of glasses filled the space as flight attendants moved efficiently, offering drinks and warm greetings. But not to everyone. Amir adjusted the sleeve of his tailored suit, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. Beside him, his wife, Noelle, glanced at the flight attendants with quiet observation, her fingers lightly tapping against the armrest. Their 16-year-old son, Elias, sat next to her, one headphone in his ear, his sharp gaze flicking around the cabin. It was a small detail at first, an unspoken shift in attention, a glance that lingered a second too long, a missing welcome. The flight attendant in charge of their section, Ms. Langley, made her way through the rows, greeting each passenger warmly, offering menus, making light conversation. She was professional, efficient, until she reached their seats. Without a pause, she breezed right past them. Elias frowned, pulling out his headphone. "She skipped us," he muttered, shifting in his seat. Noelle placed a hand on his arm, her expression calm but knowing. "Let it go." Amir didn't react. He leaned back, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest, watching Ms. Langley continue her rounds. He had seen this too many times before. People like her always believed they were subtle, that their actions wouldn't be noticed. They always assumed the same things. Minutes passed before Ms. Langley returned, this time with a tray of champagne. She moved down the aisle, her voice light and friendly as she handed glasses to each passenger. "Would you like a glass, sir?" she asked the older man seated across from them. The man accepted with a nod, and she moved to the next passenger. Another offer, another smile. When she reached Amir, Noelle, and Elias, she hesitated, but only for a second. Instead of asking, she kept walking. Elias let out a quiet scoff. "Wow," he muttered under his breath. "She didn't even ask us." Noelle exhaled softly. She wasn't surprised. She had spent years in spaces where people assumed they didn't belong. She recognized the way Ms. Langley's smile tightened when she glanced their way. Amir remained composed, but a flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. Without a word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, typing out a brief message. He sent it and slipped the device back into his jacket. A few rows away, another flight attendant, Camilla, noticed what had happened. She paused as she restocked the drink cart, watching as Ms. Langley avoided their row entirely. Her brow furrowed slightly, but she said nothing. For now. The meal service began soon after. Ms. Langley moved through the rows with practiced efficiency, offering premium selections. "We have seared salmon, filet mignon, and a vegetarian pasta option," she announced with a bright smile as she handed menus to the passengers in the row ahead. She continued down the aisle, delivering menus, until she reached Amir's family. Noelle tilted her head slightly, watching as Ms. Langley turned away without stopping. Elias was the first to react. He let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "That's crazy," he muttered. A few minutes later, Ms. Langley returned, this time with a tray. But instead of offering them choices, she set her hand on her hip and said, "We only have the chicken left." Amir raised an eyebrow, his expression still unreadable. "The others were given options," he said calmly. Ms. Langley barely met his gaze. "The other passengers ordered first." Elias exhaled in disbelief. "We never even got a menu." Ms. Langley didn't respond right away. Instead, she shifted her stance slightly, tightening her grip on the tray. "First-class meals are limited," she said, her tone sharper than before. "And priority goes to high-status passengers." Noelle let out a quiet laugh under her breath. She had seen people like Ms. Langley before. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Amir sat forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, his tone still smooth, still patient. "That's interesting," he said, "because as far as I know, we're in first class." Ms. Langley straightened, as if she was growing irritated. "If there's an issue, sir, you're welcome to speak to the gate agent after landing." Elias shook his head, whispering, "She's serious?" under his breath. Ms. Langley turned and walked away before another word could be said. Camilla, who had been watching from a distance, finally stepped forward. She lowered her voice. "I'll make sure you get the full menu," she said, offering an apologetic smile. Noel nodded in quiet thanks. Amir didn't look at Camilla. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone again, and typed a short message. His thumb hovered over the screen for a moment before he pressed send. Elias turned toward him, his curiosity piqued. "Who was that?" Amir glanced down at his phone as it vibrated with a reply. He locked the screen again, a small, knowing smile playing at the corner of his lips. "The captain," he said simply. Elias blinked. Noelle closed her eyes briefly, exhaling through her nose. She had been married to Amir long enough to know what that meant. Ms. Langley had just made a terrible mistake. Ms. Langley returned to the front of the cabin, her posture straight, her face carefully composed. She didn't need to check her reflection to know she looked professional, in control. She had been working flights like this for years, and she had dealt with enough passengers to know when to shut down unnecessary complaints. She adjusted a tray of glasses, ignoring the glance from Camilla, who had clearly noticed what had happened. It didn't matter. Nothing would come of it. People made complaints all the time, and most of them led nowhere. She had done her job. If that family had a problem, they could take it up with someone else after the flight. But just as she was about to walk back into the first-class cabin, the intercom crackled to life. "Ms. Langley, please report to the cockpit immediately." The word sent an instant chill down her spine. She glanced at the lead attendant, who gave her a questioning look, but she didn't have an answer. Her stomach twisted slightly as she set down her tray and made her way toward the front. Inside the cockpit, Captain Reynolds was seated, his hands resting on the controls, his gaze calm, but firm. He wasn't alone. A video call was displayed on the small in-flight screen, and the face staring back at her belonged to Nicholas Grant, the airline's flight operations director. His expression was unreadable, but the tightness in his jaw made her throat go dry. "Ms. Langley," Captain Reynolds said smoothly, "we have received a report about a service issue in first class." Ms. Langley swallowed. She clasped her hands behind her back, her years of experience telling her to stay composed. "A report, sir?" she asked. "Regarding what?" Nicholas Grant leaned slightly forward on the screen. "A first-class passenger was denied standard service and treated differently than others in their section. That passenger is Amir Rahim." Ms. Langley's stomach sank. Captain Reynolds gave her a long, assessing look. "Are you aware of who Amir Rahim is?" Ms. Langley hesitated for only a second. I assumed he was a standard passenger." Nicholas Grant's tone was flat. "He's not." The silence stretched. Ms. Langley felt her palms grow sweaty. Captain Reynolds spoke again, his voice carrying a weight that made her skin prickle. "Amir Rahim is the owner of this airline." Ms. Langley's breath hitched. Everything inside her mind went blank. She had spent the last hour treating the CEO of the very company she worked for like a passenger who didn't belong. She had dismissed his family, ignored their requests, refused them service, all while smiling and attending to the others around them. Nicholas Grant exhaled slowly. "Mr. Rahim has requested that you personally return to his family, issue a formal apology, and ensure they receive the full first-class experience they paid for." Ms. Langley's mouth felt dry. "Sir, I didn't know—" "That's exactly the problem," Nicholas interrupted. "You assumed. You made a decision based on that assumption, and now you're facing the consequences." Captain Reynolds' voice remained calm, but his words were final. "Fix your mistake. Now." The call ended. Ms. Langley stood frozen in place for a moment before finally stepping out of the cockpit, her heart pounding. She had been in control just moments ago. But now, she wasn't in control of anything, and she had no idea how bad this was about to get. Ms. Langley's footsteps felt heavier as she walked back down the aisle. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, drowning out the soft murmurs of passengers around her. She had always walked through first class with confidence, knowing she was in control of the cabin. But this time, every step felt like a countdown to disaster. She spotted Amir Rahim in his seat, still calm, still composed. He had one leg crossed over the other, his fingers resting against the armrest, his expression unreadable. Noelle sat beside him, her lips pressed together, a quiet amusement flickering in her eyes. Elias, however, wasn't nearly as subtle. He was watching her approach with open curiosity, waiting to see how this would unfold. Ms. Langley stopped in front of them, adjusting her posture. The other passengers nearby had noticed her arrival, their gazes flicking between her and Amir's family. She had no choice but to do this in front of them. She cleared her throat. "Mr. Rahim, I'd like to—" Amir raised a hand, cutting her off before she could continue. "Before you speak," he said smoothly, "I have a question." Ms. Langley swallowed. "Of course, sir." His voice remained steady. "At any point during this flight, did you ask any other first-class passengers if they were in the right seat?" Silence. The question hit her harder than she expected. She knew the answer, and so did everyone watching. Her fingers tightened against the fabric of her uniform. "No, sir," she admitted quietly. Amir tilted his head slightly. "Did you offer every other passenger a drink and menu before takeoff?" Ms. Langley felt the weight of the eyes around her. She could feel Camilla standing nearby, arms crossed, listening carefully. "No, sir," she said again, her voice smaller this time. Elias leaned back, shaking his head with a small laugh. "That's crazy." Noelle exhaled slowly, her gaze locked onto Ms. Langley. "And yet, you told us priority service goes to high-status passengers," she murmured. "Interesting." A few of the surrounding passengers shifted uncomfortably. The truth hung heavy in the air, undeniable and humiliating. Ms. Langley forced a small smile, though it barely held. I sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding. I want to correct my mistake." Amir's expression didn't change. He studied her for a long, silent moment, before finally nodding once. "All right," he said simply. "Then do it properly." Ms. Langley hesitated, unsure what he meant, until she realized he wasn't just asking for an apology. He was making sure everyone around them heard it. She inhaled slowly, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I apologize for my poor judgment and the way I treated you and your family," she said, her voice just loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "It was unprofessional and unfair." Amir let the words sit in the air for a moment before responding. "Good," he said. "Now, let's see if your actions match your words." Ms. Langley felt heat creep up her neck, but she nodded stiffly. "Of course, sir. I'll make sure your family receives the full first-class experience." She turned, walking quickly toward the galley, her hands trembling slightly. But as she disappeared into the back, she couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach. This wasn't over. Not even close. Ms. Langley stepped into the galley, gripping the edge of the counter as she took a slow breath. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for a tray, forcing herself to focus. The surrounding flight attendants exchanged glances but said nothing. Camilla, however, wasn't as silent. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "That didn't go well, did it?" Ms. Langley shot her a glare. "Not now, Camilla." Camilla shrugged. "Just saying. You embarrassed a billionaire and his family in front of the entire first-class cabin." She tilted her head. "And now you think handing him a better meal and a drink is going to fix it?" Ms. Langley clenched her jaw, her fingers tightening around the tray. "I did what I was supposed to do." "I apologized." Camilla let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "No, you apologized because you got caught. There's a difference." Ms. Langley ignored her, turning back to the food service. She hurriedly grabbed a menu, one she should have given Amir's family when they first boarded, and placed it on the tray alongside a selection of premium drinks. She couldn't afford another mistake. Not now. Balancing the tray carefully, she stepped out of the galley, her face composed again, but her mind racing. She approached Amir's row, this time slowing down as she reached them. She set the menu in front of him with both hands, her voice overly polite. "Mr. Rahim, my deepest apologies for not providing this earlier. Please take your time selecting your meal." Amir took the menu without a word. She turned to Noel and Elias. "Can I offer you any refreshments?" Noel didn't respond right away. She simply looked at Ms. Langley for a moment before speaking. "Are you asking because you want to or because you have to?" Ms. Langley's fingers twitched against the tray. Elias let out a quiet chuckle. "Yeah, that's what I thought." The silence that followed was heavier than before. A few passengers nearby were no longer pretending not to listen. They were watching openly now, sensing that something bigger was happening. Ms. Langley forced a tight smile. "I assure you, I'm here to serve all our first-class passengers equally." Amir closed the menu and set it aside, his expression unreadable. He reached for his phone, typed something quickly, and placed it back into his jacket. Then he leaned back in his seat, studying her in the same calm, measured way he had since the beginning. Ms. Langley hesitated, unsure what to say next. She had done what she was told, apologized, offered service, but it still didn't feel like she had fixed anything. As she turned to leave, Elias spoke again. "She's nervous," he murmured, his tone amused. "She knows this isn't over." Ms. Langley stiffened but didn't turn back. She walked toward the galley, her heart pounding, and for the first time in her career she felt something unfamiliar creeping in. Fear. Ms. Langley stepped back into the galley, pressing her hands against the counter as she tried to steady herself. The knot in her stomach had tightened, making it difficult to take a deep breath. This wasn't just a difficult passenger complaint. This was something much worse. She had worked flights with celebrities before, handled executives, even politicians, but none of them owned the airline she worked for. She had treated Amir Rahim's family like they didn't belong, and now, every step she took felt like a mistake she couldn't undo. Camilla stood across from her, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You should probably sit down before you collapse." Ms. Langley shot her a sharp look. "I'm fine." Camilla raised an eyebrow. "Are you? Because you don't look fine." Ms. Langley ignored her, busying herself with the drink cart, but her hands were unsteady. A buzz from the in-flight phone made her jump. She quickly composed herself and picked it up. "This is Ms. Langley." The voice on the other end was calm but firm. "Ms. Langley, this is Captain Reynolds." Her throat tightened. "Yes, Captain?" There was a brief silence before he spoke again. "You'll need to prepare for a conversation with airline executives upon landing." The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. Her grip on the phone tightened. Captain, I sincerely apologize to Mr. Rahim and his family. I'm ensuring they receive the service This isn't just about service," the captain interrupted. "You removed basic courtesy from a first-class passenger and his family, and you did it without thinking about why." Ms. Langley's mouth felt dry. "You have one job," Captain Reynolds continued, his voice even. "To provide equal service to all passengers in your section. That didn't happen. And now you'll need to explain why, formally." Ms. Langley swallowed hard. "Understood, Captain." The call ended with a soft click. She set the phone back on the receiver, her fingers trembling slightly. Camilla let out a slow breath, shaking her head. "That bad, huh?" Ms. Langley shot her a glare, but this time she didn't have the energy to argue. She already knew. Her career was hanging by a thread, and there was nothing she could do to stop what was coming. Ms. Langley gripped the edge of the counter, her breath uneven. The realization settled in her chest like a stone. This wasn't just a complaint. This was a formal investigation, and it wasn't just any passenger filing it. It was him. Her mind raced through possible explanations, ways to soften the situation. But none of them mattered. There were too many witnesses, too many people who had seen exactly what she had done. Even now, she could feel their eyes on her every time she stepped out of the galley. She straightened her uniform and stepped out again, determined to act as if everything was fine. But as she moved through first class, she felt the shift. Passengers who had once ignored her now glanced at her with something different. Curiosity, quiet judgment. Some whispered behind their hands. Others didn't bother hiding the way they watched her, waiting to see what would happen next. She tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the tray she was carrying. When she reached Amir's row, she forced her voice to remain professional. "Mr. Rahim, Mrs. Rahim, Elias," she said carefully, making sure to acknowledge them properly this time. "Would you like anything else? A drink? A warm towel?" Elias raised an eyebrow. "Now you're asking." Ms. Langley's fingers twitched. Noelle exhaled through her nose, lifting her glass slightly. "I think we're fine." Amir, however, barely looked up from his phone. He glanced at his screen once before tucking the device away. When he finally met her gaze, his expression was unreadable. "You've already been informed, haven't you?" he asked casually. Ms. Langley swallowed hard. "Sir?" "You've been told what's waiting for you when we land." His voice was calm, almost casual, but there was something chilling about the way he said it. Ms. Langley didn't respond right away. She knew the answer didn't matter. He already knew. She nodded stiffly. "Yes, sir." Elias let out a short chuckle, shaking his head. "You should have thought about that before you decided we weren't high status enough for first class." Ms. Langley flinched, but Amir raised a hand, signaling for Elias to stop. "Enough," Amir said smoothly. He studied Ms. Langley for a moment longer, his gaze sharp, calculating. Then, without another word, he turned back toward his window, dismissing her completely. And somehow, that was worse than anything he could have said. Ms. Langley turned stiffly and walked away, but the heat of humiliation burned through her skin. She had always been the one in control, the one who set the rules. But now she wasn't in control at all. And the worst part? She still didn't know how much further she was about to fall. Ms. Langley returned to the galley, but this time she didn't stop to catch her breath. She couldn't afford to. The moment she stepped inside, she grabbed a bottle of water, twisting the cap open with slightly trembling fingers. Camilla was still there, watching her carefully. Unlike before, she didn't have a smirk or a teasing remark. This time her expression was unreadable. "Let me guess," Camilla said finally. "He told you exactly what you already knew." Ms. Langley didn't answer. She took a slow sip of water, trying to push down the dryness in her throat. Camilla sighed, leaning against the counter. "Look, I get it. You probably thought you were just doing what you've done 100 times before, right? Making a little judgment call. You thought no one would notice." She tilted her head. "But this time you picked the wrong family." Ms. Langley tightened her grip around the water bottle. "I don't need a lecture, Camilla. No, you need a reality check." Camilla pushed off the counter, folding her arms. "You keep acting like this is something you can smooth over. Like it's just a bad shift or a misunderstanding. But it's not." She paused, letting her words sink in. "This isn't going away." Ms. Langley closed her eyes briefly, inhaling slowly before setting the bottle down. "I don't need your pity," she muttered. Camilla let out a short laugh. "Oh, I'm not pitying you. I just think it's funny." Ms. Langley turned sharply. "What's funny?" Camilla smirked. "That for years you've been the one making passengers feel small, making them second-guess whether they deserve to be here. But now?" She gestured toward the cabin. "Now you're the one who doesn't belong." Ms. Langley's hands clenched at her sides. Before she could respond, the intercom buzzed again. "Ms. Langley, please report to the cockpit immediately." This time, the words didn't just send a chill down her spine. They confirmed what she already feared. She wasn't walking off this flight the same way she had walked on. And she might not be walking back onto another one ever again. Ms. Langley stood frozen for a moment, gripping the counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The words from the intercom echoed in her head, heavier than before. This wasn't a routine call. This wasn't something she could dismiss. Camilla tilted her head, watching her closely. You gonna stand there all day, or are you gonna face it? Ms. Langley inhaled sharply through her nose, forcing her shoulders back as she straightened her uniform. She had worked too hard, spent too many years climbing through the ranks to let a single mistake, no, a single misjudgment take her down. She was a senior flight attendant. She had authority, and she wasn't going to walk into the cockpit like a scared child. She turned without another word, walking briskly toward the front of the plane. The cabin felt suffocating now, every passenger's gaze heavier than before. She could hear murmurs, low voices discussing what had just happened. They knew. They all knew. Reaching the cockpit door, she knocked once before stepping inside. Captain Reynolds was already waiting for her, his hands folded neatly in his lap. His expression was unreadable, but the way he gestured for her to sit made it clear. This wasn't going to be a short conversation. The screen next to him flickered on, and once again, Nicholas Grant's face appeared. Ms. Langley swallowed hard as she sank into the chair, her back stiff. Nicholas didn't waste time. We've received confirmation from multiple passengers regarding your treatment of Mr. Rahim and his family, he said, his tone sharp. Not only did you fail to provide standard service, but you made an assumption about their place in first class and acted accordingly. Ms. Langley's palms felt damp, but she kept her face composed. Sir, I sincerely regret the situation. Nicholas raised a hand, cutting her off. I don't need rehearsed apologies, Ms. Langley. I need facts. Captain Reynolds leaned forward slightly. Did you question any other passengers about their seats? Ms. Langley hesitated. No, sir. Nicholas's expression remained unchanged. Did you offer menus and drink service to every other first-class passenger before Mr. Rahim's family? She felt her throat tighten. Yes, sir. And did you inform them that high-status passengers receive priority, implying they were not among them? She wished she could lie. She wished she could make it all disappear. But there were too many witnesses, too many people who had seen exactly what she had done. Yes, she admitted, her voice quieter now. Nicholas exhaled slowly, shaking his head. You do realize that Amir Rahim isn't just the CEO of this airline, don't you? He's one of the most influential figures in the aviation industry. His company doesn't just own this airline, it funds half of the partnerships that keep your job running. Ms. Langley's stomach twisted. She knew Mr. Rahim was wealthy, but she hadn't realized how much power he had. Nicholas continued, his tone firm. He hasn't asked for your immediate termination. He's letting the board decide. But I can tell you now, this isn't something that's going to be ignored. Ms. Langley's lips parted slightly. Termination? The word felt foreign in her mouth. She had worked here for years. She had seniority. She had been praised for her efficiency, her professionalism. Could she really be fired over one mistake? Captain Reynolds's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained steady. You didn't just make a mistake, Ms. Langley. You made a choice, and now you have to face the consequences. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Nicholas finally leaned back, adjusting his tie. For now, you will continue the remainder of this flight, but when we land, you are to report directly to airline security. A meeting with the board will be scheduled within the next 24 hours to determine your future with this company. Ms. Langley felt lightheaded. I understand, she forced out, though her voice barely sounded like her own. Nicholas nodded once and the screen went dark. Captain Reynolds didn't speak right away. He simply studied her for a long moment before finally exhaling through his nose. I suggest you use the rest of this flight to reflect, Ms. Langley. She wanted to say something, wanted to argue, but no words came. She rose slowly from the chair, nodding stiffly before stepping out of the cockpit. The moment she re-entered the cabin, it felt smaller, suffocating. She had never been so hyper-aware of every glance, every whisper. The same passengers she had once ignored were now watching her downfall in real time. And as she walked past Amir Rahim's row, she didn't dare meet his gaze. Because she knew. This wasn't just about a flight. This was the moment her entire career unraveled. Ms. Langley walked stiffly through the first-class cabin, her hands clenched at her sides, her breathing shallow. The plane hadn't felt this small when they first took off, but now, every step felt like she was moving through a tunnel that was closing in on her. She forced her eyes straight ahead, but she could feel the stares. Some passengers quickly looked away when she passed, pretending to be occupied with their drinks or in-flight entertainment. Others didn't bother hiding their curiosity. They had heard the captain's announcement. They had watched the apology. And now, they were watching her downfall unfold in real time. Her mistake wasn't just whispered about anymore. It was the center of attention. As she reached the galley, she pressed herself against the counter, her hands gripping the edge as she inhaled sharply. Camilla was still there, waiting for her. Unlike before, she didn't have a smirk. This time, her expression was unreadable. That bad, huh? Ms. Langley closed her eyes briefly, trying to push down the tightness in her throat. I have to meet with the board when we land. Camilla let out a slow breath, nodding. That's bad. Ms. Langley didn't respond. She reached for a glass, filling it with water, but her hands were unsteady. Camilla watched her closely, then spoke again, her voice softer than before. You knew this was coming, right? Ms. Langley tightened her grip around the glass. I didn't think it would go this far. Camilla exhaled through her nose. People like him don't let things slide. Ms. Langley finally turned toward her. I apologized. I did everything I could to fix it. Camilla raised an eyebrow. Did you? Or did you just try to fix how it looked? Ms. Langley opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Because deep down, she knew the answer. She hadn't apologized because she regretted her actions. She had apologized because she was forced to, because she had no other choice. And Amir Rahim had known that. Camilla shook her head. You think this is just about an apology? This is about the fact that you made a decision the moment you looked at him and assumed he wasn't supposed to be here. She crossed her arms. And you only regret it now because you got caught. Ms. Langley felt something bitter rise in her throat. You're enjoying this, aren't you? She snapped. Camilla scoffed. Number. But I think it's about time you felt what it's like to be on the other side. Ms. Langley's jaw tightened. I've worked too hard for this. They can't just... They can, Camilla interrupted. And they will. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and final. For years, Ms. Langley had walked these aisles with confidence, her authority unquestioned. She had made calls about passengers based on nothing more than gut feelings, had turned people away with polite dismissal, had assumed, without ever considering she could be wrong. And now? She was the one being dismissed. She was the one people whispered about. She was the one who no longer belonged. Before she could respond, the in-flight phone buzzed again. Ms. Langley turned, staring at it as if it were a countdown to something she didn't want to face. Slowly she picked it up. This is Ms. Langley. The voice on the other end was smooth, calm, too calm. This is Amir Rahim. Her breath caught in her throat. I assume you already know what's waiting for you when we land, he continued. Ms. Langley swallowed. Yes, sir. Good. There was a pause, then. I have one question. She gripped the phone tighter. Yes, sir? Would you have treated my family differently if you had known who I was? Ms. Langley's throat felt dry. The answer was obvious, but she didn't want to say it. Silence stretched between them. I would have treated you with the same level of service as any other first-class passenger, she finally said, her voice weak. Amir let out a quiet hum. Interesting, because that's not what I asked. Ms. Langley's chest tightened. The pause that followed felt unbearable. Then, his voice dropped slightly, quieter, but sharper. You don't regret what you did. You regret that it was me. She felt like the floor had been pulled out from under her. I don't need excuses, Amir interrupted. I needed you to say that out loud. And you just did. Ms. Langley's breath turned shallow. I'll see you when we land, he said simply. Then the line went dead. Ms. Langley lowered the phone slowly, her fingers gripping it so tightly her knuckles turned white. Camilla let out a slow whistle. "Yeah, you're done." Ms. Langley didn't respond, because for the first time, she knew Camilla was right. This wasn't just about a meeting with the board. This was the end. Ms. Langley stood in the galley, gripping the phone so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She knew she should put it down, but her fingers wouldn't move. The weight of Amir Rahim's words echoed in her mind, over and over again, each syllable slicing through the wall of denial she had been trying to build. "You don't regret what you did. You regret that it was me." She had been so sure she could control this situation, that she could walk out of this with nothing more than a warning, maybe a temporary suspension at worst. But now she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Powerless. Camilla watched her from across the galley, arms folded. "So, are you going to act like that conversation didn't happen? Or are you finally going to admit it?" Ms. Langley slowly set the phone down. "Admit what?" Her voice came out strained, like she barely had the energy to keep up the act anymore. Camilla raised an eyebrow. "That you knew exactly what you were doing back there? That this wasn't some innocent mistake?" Ms. Langley exhaled sharply through her nose. "I was just doing my job." Camilla let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "Right. And yet you only did your job differently when it came to one family." She tilted her head slightly. "Funny how that works." Ms. Langley felt heat creep up her neck. "I don't need you to lecture me." "No, you need a reality check," Camilla shot back. "And you're about to get one as soon as we land." Ms. Langley turned away, reaching for the nearest cart, pretending to check its contents. She needed something to do, anything to distract herself from the fact that her hands were still shaking. Camilla didn't let up. "You're acting like this is unfair, like you're being targeted. But let's be real, you did this to yourself." Ms. Langley's patience snapped. She spun around, eyes flashing. "And what about all the times I wasn't caught, huh? What about all the times I made calls like this and no one questioned it?" Her voice was harsher now, edged with the bitterness of someone realizing, too late, that they were no longer untouchable. Camilla's expression didn't change. She just stared at her for a long moment before speaking. "That's the problem, isn't it?" she said quietly. "You thought no one was questioning it." Ms. Langley opened her mouth but nothing came out, because deep down she knew Camilla was right. There had been other times, other passengers who had looked at her with confusion when she double-checked their tickets but not the ones of the men in suits sitting beside them. Other moments when she had assumed a woman in comfortable clothes had wandered into first class by mistake, only to be proven wrong when she pulled out the right ticket. No one had ever called her out for it before. Not like this. But just because no one said anything didn't mean they hadn't noticed. Camilla sighed, rubbing a hand down her face. "You know, I always wondered when this would catch up to you." She glanced at the clock on the galley wall. "Looks like today's the day." Ms. Langley swallowed down the lump in her throat and turned away. She needed space. She needed to breathe. She pushed open the curtain separating the galley from first class, stepping out into the cabin. But the moment she did, she regretted it. Every glance felt like it was directed at her. The murmurs, the hushed conversations, the subtle shifts in body language. It all felt magnified, as if the entire cabin had turned into a silent courtroom, and she was on trial. A man in a navy suit was watching her over the rim of his glass, eyes filled with quiet amusement. Another passenger, a middle-aged woman, quickly looked away when Ms. Langley's gaze flickered toward her. But she could still hear the whisper that followed. "That's her, right? The one who—" Ms. Langley forced herself to keep moving, but the pressure in her chest only grew. She reached the front of the cabin near the exit row when she saw him. Amir Rahim. He was seated with the same quiet confidence he had displayed all flight. His elbow rested on the armrest, fingers lightly touching his chin, eyes focused on his phone. He wasn't smirking, wasn't gloating. He was simply existing in the space that she had tried to make him feel unwelcome in, and that somehow made it worse. She thought about walking past him, pretending like she had something important to do. But before she could take another step, he glanced up. Their eyes met. She froze. Amir didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His expression was calm, but there was something else beneath the surface. Something knowing. Ms. Langley felt her breath catch. For the first time in her career, she realized she was the one being scrutinized. Not because of her title, not because of her authority, but because of her choices. Her stomach twisted, and she looked away first, breaking the gaze. Without another word, she turned sharply and walked back toward the galley, her pulse hammering against her ribs. She barely made it past the curtain before she felt like she couldn't breathe. She pressed a hand against the counter, her head spinning. This was real. This wasn't something she could brush off. For the first time, Ms. Langley understood. This wasn't just about what had happened today. This was about the fact that she had never once thought she would face the consequences of her actions. And now, the landing gear wasn't the only thing coming down. Her entire career was. Ms. Langley gripped the counter, her breath shallow, the noise of the galley, the distant hum of conversation, and the occasional ding of the overhead announcement felt like static against her ears. The realization was sinking in fast, faster than she could process. Her career wasn't just at risk, it was over. She had spent years walking these aisles with confidence, believing she was untouchable. She had built her authority on instinct, on what she thought a first-class passenger should look like, how they should act, how they should fit in. And now she was on the receiving end of judgment, the silent stares, the unspoken accusations, and the worst part? She deserved it. She squeezed her eyes shut for a moment, forcing her breathing to steady, but it didn't help. The intercom crackled again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and your tray tables are in the upright position. We'll be landing shortly." The words felt like a countdown. Ms. Langley's stomach twisted as she braced herself against the counter. Every second that passed brought her closer to whatever was waiting for her after touchdown. She thought about calling Nicholas Grant back, about pleading her case one more time. Maybe if she explained herself properly, if she framed it as an unfortunate misunderstanding, they'd reconsider. But even as the thought crossed her mind, she knew it wouldn't work, because they already knew the truth. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern, and she had finally been caught. The curtain to the galley shifted, and Camilla stepped inside. She took one look at Ms. Langley's expression and let out a slow breath. "You look like you're about to pass out." Ms. Langley exhaled sharply, gripping the counter tighter. "Do you ever get tired of talking?" Camilla smirked. "No, not really." She leaned against the counter, tilting her head slightly. "You know, I've been thinking about something." Ms. Langley sighed, not in the mood for another one of her lectures. "What now?" Camilla crossed her arms. What would have happened if Mr. Rahim had been just another passenger? No wealth, no status, just a guy flying with his family. Ms. Langley froze. Camilla didn't wait for an answer. "Would you have even apologized? Or would you have brushed it off like you've done with dozens of other passengers before him?" She narrowed her eyes slightly. "Be honest." Ms. Langley swallowed hard, the truth pressing down on her. She knew the answer. She wouldn't have apologized. She wouldn't have been called to the cockpit. She wouldn't have been forced to face any consequences. Because the truth was, if Amir Rahim hadn't been who he was, she would have dismissed him the way she had dismissed others before him. The thought made her stomach churn. Camilla watched the shift in her expression and nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's what I thought." Ms. Langley looked away. She wanted to argue. She wanted to defend herself. But the words wouldn't come. Because deep down, she finally understood. She hadn't been unlucky. She hadn't been blindsided. She had been exposed. And now she was paying the price. Another ding rang through the cabin. The plane was getting closer to the ground. Ms. Langley let out a slow, shaky breath. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she imagined what was waiting for her after the doors opened. Security, the executives, the formal hearing, the humiliation. Her mind raced, but there was no escaping it now. Camilla shifted, glancing toward the curtain. "You should probably go back out there," she said casually. Ms. Langley snapped her gaze toward her. "Why?" Camilla smirked slightly. "Because it's the last time you'll ever walk through first class as a flight attendant." The words hit harder than she expected. Ms. Langley felt her throat tighten, but she swallowed it down and straightened her uniform one last time. She turned toward the curtain, exhaling through her nose, and stepped out into the cabin. The moment she did, she felt it again. The shift. Passengers were quiet, their gazes flickering toward her as she moved down the aisle. Some whispered. Others didn't bother hiding their expressions. She walked past Amir Rahim's row, keeping her eyes straight ahead. She refused to look at him, refused to acknowledge the weight of what she had done. But then, just as she passed, she heard his voice. "Good luck." She stiffened. He didn't say it with malice. He didn't say it like a threat. He just said it. And somehow, that made it even worse. Because he already knew. He knew this wasn't just the end of a flight for her. It was the end of everything. Ms. Langley kept walking, and with every step, she felt the life she had built unraveling behind her. The wheels of the plane touched the ground with a soft thud, sending a shudder through the cabin. The usual routine played out, passengers shifting in their seats, stretching their legs, glancing at their phones to check the time. The flight attendants made their final checks, moving down the aisles to ensure everything was in place. But for Ms. Langley, none of it felt routine. She stood near the galley, her posture stiff, her heart pounding so hard it was difficult to breathe. She had never dreaded a landing like this before. In all her years of flying, she had always felt a sense of relief once the plane touched the runway. The hard part of the job was over, another flight completed. Not this time. This time, the landing wasn't the end of her shift. It was the beginning of her downfall. She gripped the counter, her knuckles turning white. The seconds stretched, each one heavier than the last. Outside the window, the airport terminal loomed closer. She imagined what was waiting for her beyond that door. Executives in stiff suits, security officers with unreadable expressions, passengers still whispering about what had happened. She had seen passengers escorted off flights before. It was always humiliating, always final. Now it was her turn. The intercom crackled again, the captain's voice smooth and controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our destination. The local time is 3:45 p.m. Please remain seated until we reach the gate and the seatbelt sign is turned off. On behalf of our crew, thank you for flying with us today." There was a pause. Then the voice continued. "Ms. Langley, please report to the jet bridge immediately upon landing." Her stomach plummeted. The cabin fell into an eerie silence. Passengers exchanged glances. Some shifted in their seats, others pretended to be uninterested. But they were all listening. Everyone knew. She clenched her jaw, keeping her face neutral, but her hands trembled against the counter. Camilla let out a slow breath beside her. "Well, there it is." Ms. Langley didn't respond. She already knew what was coming. The plane slowed as it approached the gate, the soft hum of the engine filling the space. Flight attendants moved through the cabin, preparing for disembarkation. Overhead compartments clicked open. Passengers shifted to grab their bags, and the quiet murmur of conversation returned. But Ms. Langley remained frozen. She forced herself to move, stepping toward the front of the cabin with slow, measured steps. Every pair of eyes followed her. Then, as she reached the first row, she saw him. Amir Rahim was still seated, calm as ever. He had made no rush to grab his belongings. He was watching her, not with anger, not with gloating satisfaction, but with something worse. Expectation. She hesitated, gripping the fabric of her uniform, forcing herself to keep walking. She would not give him the satisfaction of acknowledging him again. But then, Noel Rahim spoke. "I hope you remember this moment, Ms. Langley." Ms. Langley's breath caught in her throat. She turned slightly, but Noel wasn't looking at her with pity. She wasn't smiling. Her voice wasn't cruel. It was just final. Elias sat beside his mother, arms crossed, watching the moment unfold with open curiosity. He didn't say anything this time, but his expression said enough. Ms. Langley didn't respond. What could she say? She turned away and walked forward, but the sting of those words settled deep in her chest. By the time the plane came to a full stop, she was already at the front, standing stiffly near the door. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers stood, stretching and retrieving their luggage. She was supposed to be assisting them, offering polite farewells, thanking them for choosing their airline. But she wasn't part of that process anymore. She was waiting for her own fate. The doors to the jet bridge opened. A uniformed security officer stepped inside. A few passengers gasped softly. Others murmured in hushed voices. Ms. Langley's throat went dry. The officer's gaze swept the cabin, landing on her immediately. He didn't hesitate. "Ms. Langley," he said, his tone professional but firm, "you'll need to come with us." The weight of the moment crashed down on her like a tidal wave. Her breath hitched, but she nodded stiffly, forcing her legs to move. As she stepped toward the exit, she could feel it. The shift, the judgment, the quiet satisfaction of those who had been waiting for this moment. She passed Amir Rahim's row one final time. She didn't look at him. She couldn't. She stepped off the plane and into the jet bridge, her pulse hammering in her ears. And just like that, the doors closed behind her. For the first time in years, she wasn't in control, and the airline that had once been her domain had just spit her out. Her career, her reputation, the power she had wielded so carelessly, all of it was gone. The moment Ms. Langley stepped off the plane, the cold air of the jet bridge hit her like a slap. It was a sharp contrast to the controlled, comfortable atmosphere of first class, where she had once held power. But that power was gone now. She could feel it slipping through her fingers like sand, leaving nothing but a suffocating emptiness in its place. The security officer walked beside her, his expression neutral, but she could sense the weight of his presence. He wasn't rough, wasn't aggressive, but he wasn't taking his eyes off her either. This wasn't a suggestion. This was an escort. She had never been on this side of an airline's disciplinary process before. She had been the one enforcing rules, making decisions, subtly influencing who belonged and who didn't. Now she was the one being led away, the one being dealt with. Her throat felt tight as she walked through the long jet bridge, her shoes clicking against the hard floor. The further she went, the more it felt like a walk of shame, a parade of silent punishment before she even reached the real consequences. And then she saw them. Two men in dark suits stood at the end of the jet bridge, their expressions unreadable. Airline executives. They weren't waiting for passengers, weren't welcoming crew members back. They were here for her. Her stomach churned. She had seen this before. She had whispered about this before, when other flight attendants had been pulled aside after a flight, when rumors had spread about disciplinary meetings, sudden dismissals. But she had never imagined she would be one of them. The security officer stopped just before they reached the two executives. One of the men, a tall figure with neatly combed gray hair, stepped forward. His name was Daniel Pierce, a senior director in the airline's corporate division. Ms. Langley had only met him once in passing years ago, but now he was the one holding her future in his hands. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Ms. Langley," he said, his voice even, controlled, "you are to follow us immediately to a private meeting room." Ms. Langley's pulse hammered against her ribs. "Am I being terminated?" Pierce's expression remained unreadable. "That decision will be made after your hearing." Hearing. The word sent a cold wave through her. This wasn't just an informal discussion. This wasn't a private warning or a quiet slap on the wrist. This was a formal proceeding. Pierce turned sharply and began walking, expecting her to follow. The second executive, a shorter but equally intimidating man, fell into step beside him. The security officer remained behind her, a silent presence that made it clear. This wasn't optional. She followed, her legs stiff, her entire body numb. The hallway beyond the jet bridge was emptier than usual. Other crew members had already dispersed, passengers long gone, leaving only the echo of footsteps as they moved through the terminal. Ms. Langley barely noticed where they were going. Her mind was racing too fast, trying to grasp at any possible defense, any excuse that might save her. But what excuse was there? She had no way to undo what she had done. The image of Amir Rahim's calm, knowing gaze haunted her. The way he had handled the situation with such ease, such control. He had never raised his voice, never needed to call for attention. He had simply let her unravel herself, mistake by mistake, and now she was standing at the edge of her own downfall. A set of glass doors slid open as they reached a restricted area of the terminal. The hallway was quieter here, more private. A small room stood at the end of the corridor, its door slightly ajar. Pierce gestured toward it. Inside. Ms. Langley hesitated, just for a second, but there was no escape. She stepped through the doorway. The room was simple, clinical. A long conference table sat in the center, a few chairs neatly arranged around it. A water bottle had been placed in front of one chair, almost as if someone expected her to be here for a while. The walls were blank except for a company-branded screen mounted on the far end, currently displaying the airline's logo. As Ms. Langley moved toward the table, she noticed something that made her stomach twist even tighter. A small laptop sat open on the table. The screen flickered, and within seconds, a video feed popped up. And there he was, Amir Rahim. Even through the screen, he commanded the room. His presence was just as powerful as it had been on the plane. Ms. Langley's fingers twitched against the chair. Pierce and the other executive sat down across from her. The security officer remained at the door, ensuring there was no chance of her slipping away. Pierce folded his hands in front of him. We are now beginning the formal hearing regarding the conduct of Senior Flight Attendant Evelyn Langley during Flight 726. Her full name, the official tone, the controlled, matter-of-fact delivery. This was serious. She swallowed hard, gripping her hands together under the table to keep them from shaking. Amir's voice came through the speakers, steady and sharp. Ms. Langley, do you understand why we are here? Her mouth felt dry. She forced herself to nod. Yes, sir. Say it. Ms. Langley hesitated. Pierce lifted an eyebrow, waiting. Elias's words from earlier rang in her head. Now you're asking? Noel's quiet but cutting remark. I hope you remember this moment, Ms. Langley. She had spent so much of this flight in denial, telling herself this wasn't that serious, that she could fix it. But there was no fixing this now. She had to face it. She cleared her throat, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm here, she said carefully, because I failed to provide proper service to Mr. Rahim and his family. I made an unfair assumption about their status as first-class passengers. She didn't mean to, but her fingers curled into a fist under the table. Amir didn't react right away. He just stared at her as if weighing her words, deciding if she truly understood the weight of them. Then he spoke again. Would you have treated my family the same if you had known who I was? Ms. Langley flinched. That question again. Her breath caught in her throat, because now there was no audience to witness her downfall. No passengers watching. No whispered conversations waiting to dissect her every move. It was just her and the truth, and this time she couldn't escape it. Her voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. No. The word hung in the air, final and inescapable. No excuses, no justifications, no way to take it back. She had thought she was untouchable. Now she knew she wasn't, and as the hearing continued, she finally understood. This wasn't just the end of her job. It was the moment she lost everything. The silence in the room was suffocating. Ms. Langley felt it pressing against her chest, wrapping around her throat like a vice. The weight of her own admission settled deep into her bones, sinking her lower into the chair. She had said it. She had spoken the truth she had tried to avoid, the truth she had spent her entire career pretending didn't exist. She wouldn't have treated Amir Rahim's family the same if she had known who he was. The words echoed in her head, bouncing off the walls of the sterile conference room like a death sentence. On the screen, Amir Rahim's expression didn't change. He remained composed, unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something final. Pierce, the senior executive, leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. "Ms. Langley, do you understand the severity of your actions?" Her throat was dry, but she nodded stiffly. "Yes, sir." "Do you understand that this is not just about one flight?" She hesitated. Pierce exchanged a look with the other executive before pressing a button on the laptop in front of him. The screen shifted, replacing Amir's face with something else. Security footage. Ms. Langley's stomach twisted. A silent video played on the screen. It was grainy but clear enough. The timestamp in the corner showed it had been recorded months ago. She watched as a familiar version of herself walked through first class, pausing at a row of seats. A black woman in a sleek business suit sat quietly, looking out the window, her boarding pass in hand. She didn't seem to be bothering anyone. Then, past Ms. Langley's own frozen horror, she watched herself in the footage lean down and say something to the passenger. The woman's expression flickered with confusion, then frustration. Ms. Langley could see her own lips moving, see the way her posture stiffened, the way she spoke in that polite but firm tone that she had mastered over the years. A moment later, another flight attendant stepped in, Camilla. The interaction ended. The woman remained seated, but Ms. Langley could see it, feel it. The same pattern, the same assumption. The screen flickered again, another video, another flight. This time, a man in a casual blazer, wearing headphones, looking through a menu. He too was interrupted by Ms. Langley. A similar conversation played out. Polite, controlled, but the hesitation in her body language said everything. Ms. Langley felt her body go cold. Pierce's voice pulled her back into the moment. "These are just two examples," he said smoothly. "There are more." She couldn't breathe. Her nails dug into her palms, her entire body rigid with shame. She knew, deep down, that these moments had existed, but she had never been confronted with them. She had never been forced to watch herself, to see the way she looked when she made these snap judgments, to witness her own bias in action. She felt exposed. Pierce continued, his tone calm but unrelenting. "We have received multiple reports over the years regarding your selective treatment of passengers. Until today, there was never enough formal evidence to take action." He paused before adding, "That changed on this flight." Ms. Langley clenched her jaw, keeping her gaze fixed on the table. Amir's voice came through the speakers again, controlled as ever. "Would you like to deny any of this, Ms. Langley?" She wanted to. She desperately wanted to. But she couldn't. The evidence was staring her in the face. She forced her lips to move. "No, sir." Another heavy silence filled the room. Pierce let out a slow breath and leaned back in his chair. "Then let's move on to the next step." Her breath hitched. Next step. That could only mean one thing. Termination. She wasn't naive. She knew there was no salvaging this. The evidence was too damning. The airline wouldn't risk keeping someone like her on staff, not after this, not after Amir Rahim himself had been involved. Pierce adjusted his tie. "Ms. Langley, as of this moment, your employment with this airline is under formal review. A final decision will be made within the next 24 hours, but I can tell you now." He met her gaze. "The likelihood of you keeping your position is slim to none." Ms. Langley felt like the walls were closing in. This was it. This was the moment everything fell apart. She had spent years believing she was untouchable, believing that as long as she was professional, as long as she followed protocol, nothing could touch her. She had been wrong. Amir exhaled through the speakers. "You may not have set out to discriminate, Ms. Langley, but you did. Over and over again." Ms. Langley felt her nails bite into her palms. He continued, "And today you finally have to live with the consequences." The truth of his words hit her harder than anything else. Consequences. For the first time she was facing them. Pierce tapped his fingers against the table. "Ms. Langley, you will be escorted out of the terminal. Your employee badge has already been deactivated. Pending final review, you are not to return to any airline property until further notice. The finality of it made her head spin. She had walked into this meeting hoping to save her career. Now she was walking out with nothing. Amir spoke once more. "Good luck, Ms. Langley." The laptop screen went dark. Pierce closed his folder and stood. The second executive followed. The security officer stepped forward, waiting for her. The meeting was over. So was her career. Ms. Langley didn't move at first. She sat there, staring at the empty space where Amir's face had been just moments ago, the weight of everything crashing down around her. Then, finally, she forced herself to stand. Her movements were stiff, robotic, as she followed the security officer out of the room, through the quiet hallways of the terminal. Passengers passed by in a blur. Flight crews moved through their routines as if nothing had happened. But for Ms. Langley, everything had changed. She had spent years making people feel like they didn't belong. Now, for the first time, she was the one who didn't belong. And as she stepped through the final set of doors, leaving behind the only career she had ever known, she realized she never truly had control in the first place. The airport terminal stretched before Ms. Langley like an endless hallway of glass and steel, but she wasn't walking through it as a flight attendant anymore. She was walking through it as an outsider, an employee stripped of her title, a woman whose years of experience now meant nothing. The security officer walked a few steps behind her, silent but present. She wasn't handcuffed, wasn't being dragged out like a criminal, but it still felt like an exile. Passengers bustled past her, some in a hurry to catch their next flight, others casually strolling, completely unaware of the world collapsing around her. Crew members in crisp uniforms passed by, their polished shoes clicking against the floor. She had once been one of them. Now, she was nobody. The automatic doors slid open as she stepped into the arrivals area. The familiar scent of coffee from the airport cafe mixed with the distant sound of rolling suitcases and muffled airport announcements. It was a space she had passed through 100 times before, but never like this. She wasn't arriving at work. She was leaving it behind, permanently. Her grip tightened around the strap of her handbag as she forced herself to keep walking. She didn't know where she was going. Her car was parked in the employee lot, but she wasn't sure she could even access it anymore. Her ID badge had been deactivated. Just hours ago, she had used that badge to move through security checkpoints without a second thought, to enter restricted areas with confidence. Now, it was just a useless piece of plastic at the bottom of her bag. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, hesitating for a moment before unlocking the screen. A flood of messages popped up instantly. Colleagues. What happened? Why are people saying you were pulled from the flight? Is it true you had a meeting with the executives? Tell me this is just a misunderstanding. She scrolled down, her eyes scanning the words, but she didn't respond. What could she say? That she had finally been called out for what she had been doing for years. That she had spent her career making snap judgments, never expecting them to catch up to her? That she had made the wrong assumption about the wrong passenger, and now she was paying the price? Her fingers hovered over the screen, but she didn't reply. Instead, her eyes landed on the one message that stood out from the rest. It wasn't from a co-worker. It was from an unknown number. A single message. I hope you take this as a lesson, Ms. Langley. Not just for today, but for the years before today. AR double quote. She stared at it for a long time, her breath shallow. He hadn't needed to send it. He had already won. She had lost her job. She had been humiliated. She had been escorted out of the only place where she had ever felt powerful. But somehow this message felt like the final blow, because it meant he saw right through her. He knew this wasn't just about one mistake. It was about all of them. All the times she had ignored a passenger. All the times she had made quiet judgments about who belonged and who didn't. She had gotten away with it for years, but it had only taken one wrong person, one moment, to bring it all crashing down. A voice interrupted her thoughts. Excuse me, ma'am. Are you waiting for someone? She turned, realizing she was standing near the exit, motionless, her phone still clutched in her hand. A security guard was watching her curiously. She forced a tight smile. Number I was just leaving. He nodded and walked away, but she knew what that look meant. She was just another person now. No uniform, no status, no authority. Just another woman standing at an airport exit, with nowhere to go. She exhaled and finally put her phone away. Then, without looking back, she stepped outside. The city greeted her with cold air and the dull roar of traffic. She wasn't sure what came next. She wasn't sure what she was without this job. But as she walked into the unknown, one truth settled deep inside her. For years, she had made people feel like they didn't belong. Now, for the first time in her life, she finally knew what that felt like. And it was unbearable. That's the end of the story. What do you think about what happened? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one.